Hey there, it's Madeline, and this is my Module 1 discussion board for kind of all the stuff that we worked on this week, all the videos and articles that we read. So I'll just kind of get right into it. What stood out to me the most was probably really from the expressive kind of engagement article that we read. It talked a lot about how kids don't just sit still and listen, which I completely kind of related to on this. They like to join in with stories. When someone is reading a story, they like to be a part of it, and they like to be drawn in from either the characters, the illustrations, or even the way the teacher's reading the story and maybe allowing them to even read the story with them. So I thought that was a big thing. One of the examples that the article gave, it was talking about when kids, they were singing some song during the reading, and it just kind of showed how kids like to bring their own world into the story. I think that's so true, just from the subbing experience and the experience I have had in the classroom. Sometimes the kids just like to bring up their own personal connections when you're reading a story, and you get a new maybe fact from that kid that you didn't know before, or a new personality that comes through when you're kind of doing those read alouds in a story, and a kid just kind of jumps in and says his own thing and adds a little spice into the read alouds. And kind of the 5 responses that was in that article talking about the engagement. It was 5 types. I think I wrote them down. It was dramatizing and talking back, critiquing / controlling, inserting themselves, and taking over. So I thought that was kind of interesting to kind of almost categorize each type of involvement in the stories and how we can kind of or as teachers, we can tell what type of kind of language that the kids are using is it either talking back? Are they trying to control the room when we read? Are they kind of inserting themselves? Or are they even taking over story time? So that was really interesting to kind of look out for when doing these read alouds, and just looking at that as a whole classroom discussion of just what to be on the lookout as a teacher. And let's see, another thing I wrote down. Oh, my big takeaway. So when kids quote unquote take over or talk back when you're reading, it's not necessarily them being off task. I think it can kind of show real engagement and creativity, and it can maybe come off as talking back at first, but maybe they just had a thought in their head that had a personal connection to the story, or it shows that they're listening and that they were thinking about something in the story that they were listening to, and they had a thought. But there is definitely a way to do that in a respectful way to your peers, to your classmates, and to your teacher, definitely. But I did like how the article pointed out that it did show engagement in what they were reading, and they weren't just staring off into space and not listening to the story. And one other thing that I read in the article that I really liked was motivation plus ownership equals engagement. If kids are motivated and are taking ownership of their thoughts, that they are engaging with the story. Kind of when kids own their own story that they are more invested in, and when it's something personal that they can connect to the story, they're going to want to share about it and feel more invested to tell others about it, and just kind of tell their own story, which I thought was a really good take on it from this week's module. And another thing I wrote down, it's not about compliance, it's about choice, and just fun personal connection. I think sometimes when you can just get a kid talking in your classroom, and if that comes from story time, then that's okay. And, after reading or watching the video on the strategies of read alouds, I also really liked that video. It just kind of showed how much teacher energy really matters, and the facial expressions that you use and your tone of voice, and even like she was talking about the pauses that she gives to kind of let kids have that safe space to react to the things she's telling them. Like, I wouldn't even really think about that before watching that video, to like purposely put in spaced out times to let that reaction happen and let that thinking happen. So then kids can have that moment where they're not feeling like they're interrupting, but they are adding their own thoughts into the story. So I thought that was really cool. And just kind of showing that, like in the video, the kids were like, she was talking about like when kids are hooked on the way the teacher makes them feel about how the characters kind of come alive in a story. So just kind of everything that a teacher might think is little, that kids are really just, they're sponges and they soak up everything. So all those little the energy really does matter when you're reading a story to kids. So I really liked that. And then a personal connection, I think for me, I would say I remember kind of reading in school, definitely in the media center, especially in elementary school. And read alouds kind of felt like story time. It was a time to relax. It was a time to kind of unwind, have imagination, have freedom to think about what you were hearing. And it wasn't like this big test. So I always enjoyed them. I always liked them. And you got to still learn, but it wasn't learning that was kind of scary or intimidating. It was learning that was fun, and I like that. And I want my future students in my future classroom to feel that kind of just carefree, like you can laugh or jump in or add something in or make a silly connection because that's just what you thought of in the moment. What made you feel that when reading that book? Like, I just want those real reactions from kids. Kids are funny, and they can learn through their own connections and real life experiences. And I think that's also a big part of real comprehension that teachers kind of overlook, that comes along with story time, is that kids can really show their comprehension skills when they are actively listening and being an active listener, which I think active listening relates to the kids asking questions about the story and jumping in. It means that they're listening. So I thought that was a really good aspect of this week's module. And how will I apply this in kind of read alouds in classrooms? I think definitely, obviously there is a balance. You can't just have everyone talking at once or just free space all the time. It does have to be slightly structured in a way that the teacher can still talk and get your point across in a book. So I think a balance of kind of like that flow of the story, but also an open space, like having those pauses. I thought that video showing us how to like have tips on read alouds was really helpful, talking about those open spaces and intentional pauses for the kid's voice and for them to talk was really good idea. And kind of like, if you see engagement, don't see it just as a distraction. Kind of categorize it and say, okay, I know this is what's going on. This is not just them wanting to control the space or be a distraction. Maybe they have a connection. So not just automatically going to, it's a distraction. I think that's one of the biggest things to kind of keep looking forward to in a future classroom. And then kind of, I don't know, kind of creating that culture of in a classroom where reading can be fun, plus it can be connection, but it can also be learning. It can kind of just all coexist together. It doesn't all have to be either educational, fun, or just free thinking. It kind of be all of it together. So I think that was a good idea from this module. And then kind of like the bigger picture through everything. I think reading should be more than just a prep for a test or a prep for a unit. I think sometimes reading can just be fun, and to get kids to have that kind of intrinsic motivation to want to read, they sometimes just need to read something that's fun and engaging and that they can connect with for themselves. So yeah, I think just carving out time for that authentic reading of choice books and expressive read alouds kind of just lets kids make that playful and personal connection to reading. So I wish I had more of that when I was in elementary school, but I hope to carry that in my future classroom and with future students.